This video is a guide for the Protection Paladin in patch 7.2.5. Hopefully it will help people looking to get into tanking on the Protection Paladin, whether you are a total beginner or an experienced tank. It's primarily focused on a raid tank setup, but it will be viable for all content excluding PvP. Links are in the description box below if you wish to skip to a certain section. So first, a quick overview of your class. The Protection Paladin is a very sturdy and reliable and well balanced plate wearing tank. You will be very viable at all levels of the game, ranging from normal dungeons and raids up to Mythic Plus dungeons and Mythic raiding. As of patch 7.2.5, all tanks are perfectly viable and are all quite evenly balanced for once. As a Protection Paladin, you will be blocking damage from the use of your shield, combined with your strong active mitigation abilities that you have available. You are also the only tank that offers such raid-wide utility, with the use of your cooldowns that you have available to both you and your group, be it in a dungeon or a raid. These range from damage-preventing immunities to potential life-saving heals. However, you do have one of, if not the lowest health pools of all tanks, so keeping that in check at higher content needs to be maintained. You also have poor mobility compared to other tanks, yet this can be somewhat offset by certain talent selections. You are also reliant on your cooldowns, and any mismanagement of these at higher levels can be costly. But overall, you are a well-balanced tank and will be viable in all of the content. As a Paladin tank, the stats are Haste, Versatility, Mastery and Crit. Haste and Versatility are the two stats you will want to obtain the most, as Haste reduces the cooldown on your abilities, meaning we can use them more often. And Versatility is the jack of all trades stat, meaning it gives us a bit of everything. It increases our damage and healing done, and decreases damage taken. This will be your first priority build, as this build is used for progression raiding, or for situations where you will be taking a lot of damage where you need to survive, or for situations where you do not outgear the content. Remember, your main role as a tank is to stay alive. This setup will be viable for all content, and will mostly be used in conjunction with certain talents, which will be covered in the talent section. So moving on to your talent picks, I'm going to try and explain each talent to you, so you can try and understand what they do and how they work. Hopefully you can then make your own choices when you find yourself in different situations, be it in Mythic Plus dungeons or raids. The build I will end up showing you will be the best build for survivability in a raiding setup, but it will also be viable for other content. There are links in the description box below to each talent level. So starting with the level 15 talents, we have Holy Shield, Blessed Hammer and Consecrated Hammer. Holy Shield increases your block chance by 15%, and it allows you to block spells. Any that you do block will cause you to do a certain percentage of holy damage to the attacker. The damage dealt will depend upon your gear level. Now this is not a bad talent, in fact it's actually very good, as gaining the ability to block spells, as well as increasing your block chance, will help with survivability. However, it is still only a chance of blocking spells, meaning there is also a chance that it won't block them. Now the fact that you can block spell damage with your Shield of the Righteous, which is your mitigation ability, and you will be using this on a regular basis, then you would be best off choosing another talent from this section. Unless you find yourself in a situation where there is a lot of magical damage and very little physical damage. So moving on to the next talent, which is Blessed Hammer. Blessed Hammer replaces your Hammer of the Righteous talent, and it's the highest DPS talent in this section. It is also the outright best talent in this section, as it offers both defensive and offensive capabilities at the same time. It throws out an AoE hammer which can hit multiple targets, dealing damage to every target it hits. When it hits a target, it applies a debuff to them, which causes their next auto attack that they do to you to be reduced by 12%. This has 3 charges and is on a very short cooldown, so maintaining the debuff on targets is very easy. The only time you would not choose this talent is if you find yourself in a situation where there is a lot of magical damage and very little physical damage. You would then select the Holy Shield talent. So moving on to the last talent in this section, which is Consecrated Hammer. Consecrated Hammer is by far the worst talent in this section. It causes your Hammer of the Righteous to have no cooldown, making it an instant cast. It also causes you to gain the benefit of the buff that you get from using certain abilities while standing in your consecration spell without you actually having to stand in it. Your consecration spell is part of your rotation, and it's a spell you will use a lot. When cast, any enemy standing in it will take damage. When you're standing in the spell, when you use your Hammer of the Righteous, you will cause a wave of light to hit any additional targets within 8 yards with a percentage of holy damage. When you use your Shield of the Righteous, you will gain a higher percentage of damage mitigation. And when you cast your Light or Hand of the Protector spell, you will gain a higher percentage of healing. However, because you get these benefits anywhere, apart from the Hammer of Righteous benefit, because you will have another talent selected, remember, by simply casting these abilities while standing in your consecration spell, then there is no point in taking this talent. Plus Blessed Hammer and even Holy Shield are far more beneficial. So moving on to the level 30 talents, we have First Avenger, Bastion of Light and Crusader's Judgment. There are 2 very good talents in this section, and you will need to decide which one fits your needs regarding the situation you find yourself in. So starting with First Avenger, this is a very good and powerful DPS talent, and it's the talent that I prefer to run with bar certain boss fights. When used, it deals 50% increased damage to the first target that it hits. It also grants your Grand Crusader an additional 10% chance to occur. Your Grand Crusader is a passive ability, which when you use your Hammer of Righteous, or when you avoid a melee attack, it will have a 25% chance up from the default 15% chance to reset the cooldown on your Avenger's Shield. Avenger's Shield is one of your main DPSing spells, so the more Avenger's Shields you can use, the more damage you do. It also offers some survivability due to the fact that it synergizes very well with Bulwark of the Order, which is one of your golden artifact traits. So when you cast your Avenger's Shield, it shields you for 8 seconds, absorbing 50% as much damage as it dealt. This can be excellent for some Mythic Plus dungeons and even in raids. However, this talent is not the absolute best for survivability, and should only be taken if you know you will be able to survive the encounter without extra on-demand mitigation. Taking this talent on a boss fight like Kil'jaeden, for example, could prove costly. Moving on to Bastion of Light, this is the best talent to pick for survivability, especially on boss fights and on raid progression, as it acts as an extra defensive cooldown. Bastion of Light fully restores all 3 charges of your Shield of the Righteous, which is a powerful and your most used mitigation ability. It's used for moments when you know a large amount of damage is incoming, and you find that your Shield of the Righteous is on cooldown. For example, you're tanking Kil'jaeden, and he is about to cast Fell Claws on you, and your Shield of the Righteous is on cooldown. You know that if it's not mitigated, that it can potentially kill you. Simply popping Bastion of Light will give you all charges back and will allow you to mitigate the attack and hopefully survive. It has a 2-minute cooldown, so can be used on a regular basis. This is why it's a good talent to pick for survivability, especially on raid progression. So moving on to Crusader's Judgment. This talent, in my opinion, is actually a decent talent, but I just prefer using one of the other talents in this section. Crusader's Judgment gives you an extra charge of your Judgment spell, which is part of your core rotation, and you will be casting it a lot. You can argue that this could be very good for your survivability, since your Judgment spell reduces the cooldown on your Shield of the Righteous. This would mean you could have it available quicker, since you now have 2 charges of Judgment. It also pairs very nicely with the level 90 talent Judgment of Light, meaning you could judge 2 targets and get the benefit of the additional passive heal that the talent gives you. If you take all of that and combine it with the 2-piece set bonus from your tier 20 set, which makes your Judgment spell have a 30% chance of resetting the cooldown of Avenger's Shield, and recovered the benefits of Avenger's Shield under the First Avenger talent, then it shows that this could be a very useful talent in terms of survivability. However, I prefer to run either First Avenger for the additional DPS benefit, or Bastion of Light when on high damage fights where guaranteed on-demand mitigation is required. So moving on to the level 45 talents, we have Fist of Justice, Repentance and Blinding Light. Now these are basically your crowd control abilities, and they are all pretty good. They are situational, so it's up to you to decide which one fits your situation best. Please note, none of these will work against any dungeon or raid boss, and are primarily used for trash or normal mobs in PvE. So starting off with Fist of Justice, this in my opinion is the default talent choice here, and the one that will be of benefit the most. It reduces the cooldown of your Hammer of Justice, which is your 6-second stun with a 1-minute cooldown. By taking this talent, when you use your Hammer of Justice and it enters the 1-minute cooldown phase, every time you cast your Judgment spell, you will reduce the cooldown by 10 seconds. This means that in a very short period of time, you will once again have your stun available. Moving on to Repentance. This is basically a 60-second stun, and it's just like a rogue sap ability. It has a short cast time and only a 15-second cooldown before it can be used again. It's a very good talent if you want to control a dangerous ad in a dungeon or a raid, or if you simply just want to skip by an ad and stay out of combat and you don't have a rogue in your party. I would say this is more beneficial in 5-man dungeon content. Moving on to the final talent in this section, which is Blinding Light. Blinding Light is an AoE stun with a 90-second cooldown that stuns enemies within 10 yards for 6 seconds. Any damage dealt to the ads whilst they're stunned, other than holy damage, will cause the stun to break. This is more useful in 5-man dungeons like Court of Stars for example, where multiple ads may need to be interrupted. This used to be the go-to talent in this section, as the stun used to also deal damage, but since that is no longer the case, Fist of Justice in my opinion has now become the most beneficial and default talent. So moving on to the level 60 talents. We have Blessing of Spell Warding, Cavalier and Retribution Aura. Starting with Blessing of Spell Warding, this is a very good talent, as it places a blessing on you or a party member, protecting them from all magical damage for 10 seconds. It has a 3-minute cooldown, which is relatively short for such a powerful cooldown. However, if you take this talent, it will replace your Blessing of Protection, which makes you immune to all physical damage for 10 seconds. I myself have found Blessing of Protection to be more useful when raiding Tomb of Sagaris, but that's just my opinion. Blessing of Spell Warding can be very good in Mythic Plus runs, especially for necrotic debuffs, as it can stop them being applied to you. So for example, if you use your Spell Warding with about 9 seconds left on the debuff, it will allow the timer to run out and your stacks to reset. So you need to make the decision whether you and your party will benefit more from having magical or physical immunity in the content that you are doing. Moving on to Cavalier. This gives your Divine Steed an extra charge, and it should be the default talent that you take, unless you need Blessing of Spell Warding. Divine Steed is your movement speed ability, which is on a 45-second cooldown, so having an extra charge of this is extremely beneficial. When used, it increases your movement speed by 100% for 3 seconds, and since Paladins don't have the best mobility compared to some of the other tanks, then taking this talent removes the mobility issue when mobility is really needed. Moving on to the last talent in this section, which is Retribution Aura. This places a buff aura onto both you and anyone in your group, as long as they are within 60 yards of you. If you or a party member is hit with a melee attack, you will deal holy damage back to the attacker. However, the increase in DPS you would gain from taking this talent would be extremely small, and compared to the other talents in this section, especially for doing dungeons and raid content, it's not worth considering. It seems to be more beneficial as a PvP talent, but I don't PvP, so don't quote me on that. Moving on to the level 75 talents, we have Hand of the Protector, Knight Templar, and Final Stand. So starting with Hand of the Protector, this replaces your Light of the Protector spell, and it still remains your self-heal ability. The difference with it now is that you can now use your self-heal to heal other party members for a percentage of their missing health, as well as yourself. This can be very useful when other party members are close to you and are in need of a quick heal. I can't tell you how many times I've used this in a raid on the other tank or on a healer who has been on low health, to then see their health jump back up to almost full. This talent also gains the benefit from standing in your consecration spell, as we discussed in the level 15 talents. However, the main reason for selecting this talent is because it dramatically reduces the cooldown on your self-heal compared to Light of the Protector. In my case, it reduces the base cooldown by around 5 seconds. This means you can use your self-heal on a much more regular basis, which helps you be able to control and regain your health after a large damage spike. This is without doubt the best talent in this section and therefore your default pick. It is the best talent for pretty much every situation you find yourself in. So moving on to Knights Templar. This is another mobility talent, whereas Cavalier gave you an extra charge of your Divine Steed, Knight Templar instead reduces the cooldown of your Divine Steed from 45 seconds to 22.5 seconds. It also, when used, reduces any damage taken by 20%, so it could also be used as a damage reduction ability outside of melee range. However, with the vast array of damage reduction spells Paladins already have, there is no real use for it. Even more so if you have the Cavalier talent selected, as you are not going to need that much mobility in this current content. So moving on to the last talent in this section, which is Final Stand. If you choose this talent, when you use your Divine Shield, you will also taunt all enemies within 15 yards for 8 seconds. So if you are not aware of what your Divine Shield does, it basically makes you unkillable for 8 seconds, so it's a very powerful defensive immunity. However, the problem with using this ability is that when used, you instantly lose all threat, meaning whoever is next to you on the threat meter is going to have all of the aggro transferred to them, and if this is anyone other than the second tank, you're basically going to kill them. So you have to be careful if and when you use this ability. However, if you talent this ability, when used you will taunt the target and automatically maintain all of the threat, as well as becoming unkillable for 8 seconds. However, it does have a massive 5-minute cooldown, so could only really be used once per fight if needed. It could be good for large pulls in Mythic Plus runs, especially when the Necrotic affix is up, but in reality your Hand of the Protector can be used many times over during that time frame, so offers way more benefit. So moving on to the level 90 talents, we have Aegis of Light, Consecrated Ground, and Judgment of Light. The Aegis of Light is a 3-minute cooldown and it channels a protective barrier around the tank and allows anyone standing within 10 yards behind the tank to have their damage reduced by 20% for 6 seconds. So it's basically a raid cooldown for a tank, and it's actually not a bad one. If your group is required to stack up for AoE healing during a large burst of damage, then this could be useful as extra mitigation. However, this is also where I have an issue with it, as using it effectively as a tank can be problematic due to the fact that your group or raid has to position themselves behind you for this to be effective. And as a tank, the one place you don't want any of your group to be is behind the tank who is in front of the boss, especially if a large amount of damage is about to occur. All it would take would be for the tank not to pop the cooldown at the right time, or if the tank did not position themselves correctly, or if the rest of the group or raid were not positioned correctly, then things could go wrong. Using it as an off tank, i.e. whilst you're not tanking the boss, could prove beneficial, but I'm struggling to really see a use for it in current Legion content. So moving on to the next talent, which is Consecrated Ground. And this is a decent talent, but it's not the best talent in this section and should only be used in certain circumstances. It heals up to 6 of your party or raid members who are standing in your consecration spell for a percentage of health. Any enemies that pass through your consecration spell will be slowed by 50%. The only time you should really be using this ability as a tank is for Mythic Plus dungeons, to help kite and slow adds when problematic affixes are in place, or if you find yourself in a group or a raid with a Holy Paladin who is using the Judgment of Light talent. The final talent in this section is Judgment of Light, and this should be the default talent bar certain circumstances. Every time you use your Judgment spell, which is part of your core rotation, you will apply a debuff to the target called Judgment of Light. This causes the next 40 successful attacks against the target to heal the attacker for a certain amount of health. The amount this heals people for won't be a staggering amount, but you will be helping to passively heal the raid, as you will be applying this debuff to every target you hit, and every bit of healing really does help. The only reason you would not take this talent would be if you had a Holy Paladin in the group who was using Judgment of Light, or if you were running Mythic Plus dungeons where enemies needed to be kited due to problematic affixes. Then you would select the Consecrated Ground talent. So moving on to the level 100 talents, we have Righteous Protector, Seraphim, and Last Defender. So starting with Righteous Protector, this is the best talent by far when it comes to survivability, as it reduces the cooldown of your Light of the Protector or Hand of the Protector spell by 3 seconds every time you use your Shield of the Righteous. So this means you will be able to use your self-heal more often, as you will be consistently mitigating damage, therefore automatically reducing the cooldown on your self-heal. This talent should be paired up with the level 75 talent, Hand of the Protector, for maximum benefit. This talent also works extremely well with the legendary helm if you are fortunate enough to have it. This talent also reduces the cooldown on your Avenging Wrath. Avenging Wrath is your 2-minute cooldown that increases your DPS and healing received by 35% for 20 seconds. This means you will also be able to use this ability more often as well. This can be used as a DPS boost when burst damage is required, or as a healing boost during high damage phases of a fight. Moving on to Seraphim, this talent can be considered a survivability loss but a DPS increase. It has a 30-second cooldown, and when used it increases your haste, crit, mastery and versatility by a certain amount depending upon your gear. This lasts for 8 seconds per charge. This can be great in Mythic Plus dungeons for both single and AoE targets, as you can really end up doing a considerable amount of damage. However, for raiding, especially progression raiding, then taking this talent is not wise, unless you outgear the content or the fight has a very set damage pattern, where you know you will have mitigation available at a certain time. The Maiden of Vigilance is an example from current content of a set damage pattern fight. The reason for this is that when you use Seraphim, you consume up to 2 charges of your Shield of the Righteous, aka your mitigation, which means it affects your survivability. The last thing you want is to be left in a situation where a large amount of damage is incoming and having no way to reduce it. Remember, your main role as a tank in a raid is to stay alive. Moving on to the final talent in this section, which is Last Defender. This talent causes each enemy that hits you, who is within 8 yards of you, to reduce the damage that you take and increase the damage that you do by 3%. This talent, in my opinion, is not worth taking, for raiding especially, as Seraphim is much better DPS wise and Righteous Protector is far better survivability wise. It may be of use in some high level dungeons when you are consistently dealing with multiple adds, but for the most part the other two are far more beneficial in my opinion. So finally, this is what your talent setup should look like for pure survivability. So moving on to your artifact talent trees. Artifact knowledge is quite easy to obtain right now, especially if you have a main whose artifact knowledge is capped. So filling up your artifacts talent tree on an alt is quite easy to do. However, for people who are not in that position and want to know the best order to pick their weapon talent traits, then please just look at the following images for reference. The first image is of the first artifact talent tree, so simply fill in numbers 1 to 18 until you have 35 points in your weapon. Once you have done this, you will receive a short questline from Khadgar, and once completed, you will unlock a second artifact talent tree. So again, please use the image for reference if needed, and just select the numbers 1 to 14 for the best path to take to the last talent. So the rotation for the Protection Paladin is very simple. For single target fights, you want to open with your Judgment spell, followed by Consecration, followed by Avenger's Shield, and then finally Blessed Hammer. You then basically just want to keep using whichever ability is off cooldown. However, this does slightly change if you have 2 pieces of your tier 20 set. You would then open with Avenger's Shield, followed by your Judgment spell, followed by Consecration, and then finally Blessed Hammer. The reason for this is because your Judgment spell with the 2-piece set bonus has a 30% chance of resetting Avenger's Shield, so you're potentially missing out on that proccing, and therefore missing out on extra DPS. Whenever your Avenger's Shield does proc, then always prioritise this. For AoE fights, you want to open with Avenger's Shield, Consecration, Judgment, and then Blessed Hammer. To help smooth out damage, you want to be using your Shield of the Righteous, as this is your main mitigation ability. You will need to be the one that determines when you need to use it, but you should be using it often, especially when taking large amounts of damage. It's always best to try and keep at least 1 charge available if possible, just so you're not caught out when you really need it. But don't stress over that too much, as you will not be able to maintain the uptime of your Shield of the Righteous for 100% of the time. Plus you also have other abilities to help cover for that. Once you get used to specific mobs and fights, it will become second nature to you. Please also remember to try and use this while standing in your consecration spell, as this makes it 20% more effective to the damage reduction it gives. If your health drops low, then this is where you would use your self-heal, which is Hand of the Protector. This will heal you for a certain percentage based upon your gear, and in my case it heals me for 34% of my missing health. However, if I'm standing in my consecration spell, then I gain an additional 20%, so make sure you're standing in it for maximum benefit when healing. Your Eye of Tyr, which is your artifact ability, is also a great way of mitigating damage, and you should not be afraid to use it on a regular basis. It has a short 1 minute cooldown and reduces damage taken by 25% for 9 seconds. It also does some damage when activated. It's good to use this when you have no Shield of the Righteous available, as by the time the 9 seconds expires, you will have regained some charges of Shield of the Righteous. If a large burst of damage is incoming, this can also be used alongside your Shield of the Righteous for stackable mitigation. The only time you should not use this is when you know a large amount of damage is about to occur and you need a strong defensive cooldown to help you stay alive. Moving on to Ardent Defender. This is on a 2 minute cooldown, but it does get reduced when traits are placed into your artifact weapon, so mine is on a 1.5 minute cooldown. When used, it reduces all damage by 20% for 8 seconds. When active, any attack that would kill you will instead bring you to 12% of your maximum health. Again, you should be using this on a regular basis to help mitigate the damage. It can also be used alongside your Shield of the Righteous for stackable mitigation. The only time you should not use this is when you know a large amount of damage is about to occur and you need a strong defensive cooldown to help you stay alive. Moving on to Guardian of Ancient Kings. This is a very powerful defensive ability and has a big 5 minute cooldown, meaning you're only really going to be using this once per boss fight. When used, it reduces all damage you take by 50% for 8 seconds. You should use this when you know that a large amount of damage is about to occur that will most likely kill you. Having such a large reduction of damage can help you stay alive long enough for a healer to top up your health, or for you to even heal yourself. So moving on to your best enchants, gems, food, and other consumable items. So starting with your enchants, you should enchant your neck with Mark of the Heavy Hide, as when this procs it increases your armor by 3000, and having the chance of more armor is very good. You should enchant your cloak with Binding of Strength, as this increases our strength by 200, which helps increase the damage of our abilities and increases our parry chances. And finally, you should enchant both of your rings with Binding of Haste, as this increases our haste by 200, which helps increase how fast we can use our spells. Moving on to the best gems to equip, you really just want to have all of your gem sockets filled with Quick Dawn Light gems, as these give you an additional 150 haste and will be the most beneficial for you. However, if you do have multiple items with sockets, or a high amount of haste, then you may wish to include at least one Saber's Eye of Strength for an increase in DPS. So moving on to the food, the best food to eat is Sea Battered Fish Plate for survivability, as this increases our versatility by 375 for 1 hour, meaning it helps boost our damage and healing done and decreases our damage taken. However, if you think you don't need the additional survivability boost, then you could always eat the Ajari salad, as this will increase your haste by 375 for 1 hour, and is therefore an increase in your DPS. Please note, if you die, you will lose the food buff. So moving on to the best flasks. The Flask of 10,000 Scars is the best for your survivability, as this increases your stamina by 1950, and therefore increases your health pool. Again, if you think you don't need the additional survivability boost, then you could always take the Flask of Countless Armies, which increases your strength by 1300, and therefore increases your DPS. These flasks are a battle elixir and will last for 1 hour, or 2 hours if you are an alchemist. These flasks will remain even if you die. Moving on to the potions. The best potion to use during the fight for survivability is Unbending Potion, as this increases your armor by 3500 for 25 seconds. Another good potion to use is the Potion of Old War. It summons allies that join you in combat and deals almost 200,000 in damage, so it's a big burst of DPS. I tend to pre-pot with the potion of Old War and then keep the unbending potion for an emergency cooldown. However, if I know I'm not going to need it, then I will use another Old War potion during the fight. On a side note, please make sure you only use this when you are tanking the boss, as you could end up over-threatening the other tank if they are tanking it when you use it. The other potion you can use is Potion of Prolonged Power, which increases all stats by 2500 for 1 minute, but in my opinion it's not the best for raiding. It's probably best for Mythic Plus dungeons when pulling trash packs. Moving on to Augment Runes. These increase your agility, intellect and strength for 325 for 1 hour, so they are actually very good. They can be obtained by running through looking for raid, or they can also be bought on the auction house but are usually quite expensive, so I tend not to bother with them. When used, if you die, you also lose the buff. And finally there are Vantis Runes. These are made by players with the inscription skill and can be bought on the auction house. They increase your versatility by 1500 and are useful if you find yourself struggling on a certain boss in a raid. The effect lasts for the week and can only be used on 1 boss per week. Anyway guys, this was my attempt on trying to make a class guide for the Protection Paladin for patch 7.2.5. I really do hope it helps some people out and helps them get into tanking on the Paladin. All of this is only my opinion, so I'm sorry if I've missed anything out. But if you can you please comment, like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.